Welcome back to another episode of Movement is a Lifestyle. I'm your host, Ben Reuter. As you can probably tell by the title, our goal is to promote movement as a lifestyle and not just an activity. Whether you're a runner, a walker, if you like to swim, ski, take group classes, or what fits in very well with today's guest, cycle, we want to promote it so you make it part of your life and not just an activity that you do when it's convenient. We want to welcome today our guest, Mike Schultz. Mike is a personal trainer, a coach, and the owner of a business called Highland Training, where he works mostly with cyclists. Mike, thanks for taking time to come on Movement is a Lifestyle.
You're welcome. Glad to be here. I've been doing the cycling and coaching thing for 15 years now, and I've done a few interviews with Dr. Ben here, and so I look forward to discussing movement and lifestyle today.
And I know you specialize mostly in cycling, and you are an accomplished cyclist yourself. You can use the googly web and find the various races you've won. But I think what makes you unique and a number of professionals unique is there are a lot of people out there who can rest on their accolades and talk about, look what I did this and I did that. And one of the things I've really enjoyed since I've connected with you is watching your social media and the fact that there's not a whole lot about look at what I did, but there's a whole lot about promoting what the athletes or the people who work for you, not really work for you, but that you coach. What was the rationale or the idea behind first getting into cycling as a sport? And then we want to build on that and talk a little bit about why coaching and why does that bring you joy and how did you pick that as a career?
That's a long story, but what we'll start is back in the late 90s, I got into mountain bike riding. Actually city and casual riding, and through friendships grew the race scene and mountain bike races and cross-country mountain bike races, and it was fairly a new sport through the 90s, and it started to grow through the 2000s, and so early in the 2000s I decided to do everything to become the best ultra-endurance cyclist I can. And so I ended up quitting my job, working part-time, and riding my bike for about 7 or 8 years.
And some people may not know what an ultra-endurance cyclist is. You know, they may go out and ride 20 miles on the Montour Trail or do a criterium. What is an ultra-endurance cyclist?
My passion at the time was 24-hour racing. And I would ride my bike for 24 hours straight without stopping. Well, I would stop, but that's another story at times. And I had a few good events over the years. I met a lot of great people. I traveled the country to race in large events and small events. And this is all way before the social media has taken over, so I wasn't able to actually post anything. But yeah, I grew a love of cycling, and through that challenge, I had tons of questions about fitness and training and what are the answers behind how do you get faster on a bike, how do you get stronger in general, and that led me into pursuing certifications in a CA, USA Cycling, and so on, and then developing a coaching business.
I know one of the things that for some people, they'll hear 24-hour bike races, that's nice. And I like the fact that you talked about the late 90s because both of us have a mutual friend, Elaine Tierney.
Yes.
And I have blamed her for my hobby, passion, money I've spent on bicycles because the 1990s were the very early stages.
Yes.
What was it about saying, I want to go for 24 hours, which for some people they'll go, that sounds reasonable, and other people are, you're crazy. Why 24 hours versus the more traditional races that were anywhere from 15 to maybe 60 miles?
Well, part of it was I lived in the Seven Springs area. I moved up there and lived out of a small little cabin for years, and the local race was a 24-hour mountain bike race promoted by Seven Springs Resort. And I just decided to tackle that because I was really good at riding long distances. I was not necessarily really fast at short distances. So it was something I enjoyed to do. And then the first time I did it, I did well. I was standing on the podium and I never stopped. And then that lit a fire. And from there, I put everything into riding my bike over those years.
And I know that there are many people who get in whatever the sport or activity is. I think probably a great example are people who swim at a very high level. Once they're no longer competitive or they get older where maybe they're only competitive, it would be a master's level, that's it, and they never want to see a pool again. I've known a large number of cyclists. I mean, I've met you, Paul Swift, who's a friend of mine who was on the U.S. national team as a track cyclist. They're in some instances 20, 30 years away from competing at a high level, and they just love to ride their bikes. What is it for you about being a bike rider? I mean, I know I've seen you post pictures of your son who getting on a bike, and this is obviously not just I like to do it, but I like to get other people involved. What is it about the bike that makes you want to continue to ride your bike?
There's something intrinsically implanted in my head that every time I get on a bike, it is pure joy. Even to today, I'm not as fast or as fit as I used to be back in the 2000s, but I still enjoy being fast and fit at my age, and I still enjoy being competitive. I love traveling to races. I just went to Vermont, did a race up there and back, and it's beautiful country. But every single time I leave my house on my bike, it's the wind, it's the views, it's the sights, the smells, and the feel of being on the bike that gets me excited.
And I know one of the things you mentioned when you talked a few minutes ago about your path into cycling is the friendships you made. I think if you're involved in any sort of movement activity, whether you race as a cyclist or you do tours or you do running races, there's always 2 or 3 or 4 people that you meet and you just continue that relationship.
Yes.
And I think you'd probably agree with me, probably some of the best conversations you've ever had in your life took place on the bike where you didn't even think you were going to have that conversation, and you can meet that person 3, 4, 5, or some cases 10 years later, and you continue that conversation just as if you'd finished riding yesterday afternoon.
Yeah, and races are unique because you tend to meet some of the same people, and you develop this little group of friends through racing your bike, or it doesn't have to be bike, it could be running or anything, but generally off-road and endurance races draw that type of crowd and loyalty, and that is great because it's a comfortable feeling showing up at an event and you can shake hands with someone who's a fellow age group or working as hard as you, and you get out and ride, and it's just a great atmosphere.
I'm curious, you finish racing at a very high level, you still do some racing, you're still competitive in your age group, and for people who aren't familiar, unfortunately, unless you're unique, when you hit 35, 40, you get slower, but you can still compete against people in your age group. What is it that allowed you or encouraged you or gave you the impetus to say, it's not just about me, I can maybe make a living at this, I can maybe help other people, maybe some of them will be better than me, maybe some of them won't be as good as me, but they can still achieve goals and I can help them achieve that?
Well, that all started because I was seeking information in the field, and I was curious about, how personally to get stronger, and that drove me to, or led me to believing that I could learn enough about physiology and exercise and sport to make someone else faster, and I could benefit them because I felt that the information out there in the world on the sport and how to get fast was mixed. And it is, I just felt that I had a passion and need for it. And once I started learning about the physiology and bringing my experience into it, and then actually working with people, I was sold, and I was like, I'm gonna, really help a lot of people, and it's been a journey since then. So,
I always like to ask people who are in a sport or activity for a long period of time, we're 20-some years since you started racing. Mm-hmm. Do you think, knowing what you know now, if you could take that knowledge and take it back to the late 90s, early 2000s, you would have been better? Or do you think you got the most out of your abilities at that age?
I feel like I'm a hard worker, and I've always had to work really hard to get fast on the bike, and that's my genetics, and I feel that that's why I learned what I learned. But I'm not sure if I could have gotten any more out of it. I mean, I was riding 10 to 12,000 miles a year back then, so I was putting everything into it. I mean, do I have more knowledge now? Absolutely. Could there be some tweaks? Absolutely. But how much faster would I have been? I don't know. So.
And I know some people are also techno-weenies. That's kind of a joke in the bike world. Thinking of the bikes you ride now, if you could have taken that bike and put it back in the late 1990s, early 2000s, everybody else was riding that technology, would that have benefited you?
Yeah, 100%. I laugh because a friend, I used to tell them, like, I don't want to ride with any technology. I just want to ride my bike. And 5 years later, now I have a power meter on my bike, and I have heart rate monitors, and I have all of this gear to look at my dashboard of training. And I would not change that and go back. I do like to go ride sometimes, just to ride, but yeah.
I'm curious, Highland Training is your business. Who's the sort of athlete that you are best to work with, or does somebody need to be a racer to benefit from having a coach for cycling or for even running?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I work with a wide variety of people. I've been lucky to work with a lot of people over the years, probably in the 500 plus person range. I've gotten to work with world elites, top 50 in the world, in other countries. And I also work with local age groupers who are mom and dads working 9 to 5, who just love to compete and have limited time. So I have a lot of experience working with a lot of different people. The majority of people that come through my door don't race on a very high level, although I have always a few elites. The majority of people want to complete a race, they want to complete an event, whatever it is, and feel good about that. So.
And that's something that with cycling, and I know running also, which is kind of unique, maybe golf is similar, you can be an age grouper or somebody who has a 9 to 5 job or a 10 to 6 job,
Yep.
proper training, and you could race on the exact same course as somebody that you might see on ESPN or ESPN2. And I think that's what makes cycling and sports like that so unique.
It is unique, and there's a lot of conversation about that in the field right now, especially with gravel racing and introduction of World Pro Tour riders coming to gravel races that are grassroots. I view it as a good thing. I love being out there with the best in the world, and even if I'm at the start line and I never see them again, it's exciting. It's exciting for the participants. It's good promotion for the sport. It's the cool thing about cycling. Yeah.
I know I did some age group triathlons in the late 90s, early 2000s, and I still remember an Ironman Lake Placid in 1999 as I'm struggling through the run way, way early in the run. And all of a sudden I hear this small voice, "Excuse me, can I get by?" And it's the lead woman professional racer who's about 5 foot tall and 95 pounds, running twice as fast as me. And you know, that's a cool memory that I was on the same course as this woman. Mm-hmm. She finished about 8 hours ahead of me, maybe not 8, maybe 6, but still to see how fast they move is just amazing. Whereas if you're a basketball player, maybe the closest you get is courtside seats.
Right, right.
Somebody is interested in getting in cycling, and I think you mentioned gravel racing, and now that COVID is slowly changing, more bikes are becoming available, and people may have discovered cycling during COVID because it was an outdoor activity. Mm-hmm. They think they want to get into bike racing, or they think they want to get into bike riding, and there is so much information out there. I like to say this great thing about social media is you can get a lot of information. Mm-hmm. The bad thing about social media is you can get so much information, and like it or not, people like you are the experts. So somebody's out there that's saying, you know, it's getting into winter, going to be Christmas time, I might get a present. What does somebody need to start cycling? They say, you know, maybe I want to do a race. Maybe in the fall I want to do the Tour de Montour next year. But, you know, do I need to spend $10,000 on a bike? Do I need a power meter? Do I need, you know, X, Y, and Z so that all of a sudden it becomes very expensive? Or what do you need to just get started?
Well, the expense or whatever you would spend on your equipment or the bike, it depends on you. And so if you can afford the $10,000 bike, then go for it. You don't need a $10,000 bike. You can have a bike for a few $1,000s, or you can buy a used bike. There are plenty of them out there for way less, and then just put some time into it. So, you know, it's all about what is comfortable for you to afford and where you want to take it. Personally, I don't see much difference between a $3,000 bike and a $10,000 bike. Maybe a few, grams of weight, and some of the bling that these bikes come with, like electronic shifting and so forth. But I would say get a solid bike, something that's going to last and take a beating. And for a few $1,000s, you can get that. The other important thing is that it's important to remain consistent all year long. So riding indoors, especially living in Western Pennsylvania, is an unfortunate task of a cyclist because there's no way to do it in this snow outside. So getting an indoor trainer or having a smart trainer, that is a valuable piece of equipment.
Somebody's gotten into cycling, or they recreational cycle, and they've got children, say 10 and up, and the kids are not really enjoying group activities as far as team sports, or maybe they're clumsy and don't do well with ball sports and they think they want to do cycling. Do they need a coach, or is there a benefit for a coach? When do you decide for a child, you know, when, or an adolescent, when a coach might be a good idea?
I think that with the rise of the high school mountain bike scene, especially here in Pennsylvania, it has grown quite significantly. We have a few high school athletes under us, and just a couple. They are some of the fastest of the high school athletes. I think that, generally speaking, when it comes to a high school athlete, around 16, 17, 18 years old is acceptable if you wanted to get into a coach. As long as you can focus on a plan and not get too overloaded with information, because it's important to have fun. That's a key.
And I know one of the things that you commonly see with youth sports is parents think their kid is going to be the next great hockey player or the next great baseball player or football. That's what you think with your son. You can actually get, in some schools, you can get mountain biking scholarships to go race. I know there's at least one school in Colorado, and at least one school in Kentucky.
Yes.
Can a coach help an athlete maybe have a better chance of doing that versus training on their own?
Yeah, 100%. A coach brings a separate set of eyes to the picture. You've the coach experience, which is really valuable. But outside of that, you have a coach that's directing an athlete, pushing buttons to say, go harder or go easier or do this or do that. Things that an athlete at any age has a hard time doing on their own because it's really hard to analyze yourself. So a coach brings a unique aspect to it, and coaches in general will help in any sport, yes.
I'm curious what you do when you get a client that comes to you who has totally unrealistic expectations. I mean, you mentioned you work with some people who potentially, with a little luck, can go to the Olympics, or you may have worked with some Olympic level athletes. And there may be some other athletes that you work with that have these unrealistic expectations. You mentioned gravel racing. Some of these gravel races are 200, 300, 400 miles. Somebody comes to you and say, hey, Mike, I just bought a gravel bike. I've been doing 20 to 30 miles on the Montour Trailer in North Park. I think I can win this gravel race that's 200 miles. How do you set them up for success so they have a good experience, but also reality?
Well, I look at their background and I start asking them questions, and I ask them questions about their size and their age and their experience and their genetics and their work ethic. If someone is in their late 40s but they're able to ride 30 hours a week, well then they may have an opportunity to do that. But if someone's only putting in 5 hours a week, then I'm very realistic. When it comes to the strength and conditioning stuff, I'm a straight shooter. I don't cover it. I don't candy coat it. I tell it exactly like it is so that they have a realistic expectation. And if they decide to come on as a coached client, we work really hard week by week. And if they get close to that goal, great. Some people achieve it. There's a lot of factors involved.
Somebody wants to work with you. You mentioned wide variety of experiences, wide variety of abilities. They just come to you and say, my buddies worked with you. They say you're really good. I'd like to work with you. And they have time limits. What's the minimum amount of time if you're going to work with an athlete? Where you say, look, I don't think I'm a good fit because you just don't have enough time. That's not a bad thing necessarily, because cycling is part of life. It isn't life.
Correct. I will say this, that the average cyclist that competes puts in anywhere between 8 and 12 hours a week. The elites, or if you want to be really good, you're going to put in more than 15 hours a week. If you're a super elite or world elite or even national elite, you're going to be putting in 25 hours a week. Anything in the 6 to 8 hours range per week, you can maintain fitness. You can make small gains here and there, but if you really want to be competitive, between 8 and 12 hours a week is pretty much the standard.
I know I used to run when I lived in Florida with a guy who was a baseball coach, and he used to tell his athletes, he said, social life, classes, and baseball, pick 2 of the 3.
Yes.
It sounds like even with a busy professional, if you've got a family, you can say, okay, cycling, family, maybe a little bit of a social life, but throw the television out the window or the sitting down and watching Steelers football unless you're on a trainer.
Right. Well, I do the same. I can only pick a few things, plus I coach. So I have to fit it all in. But I agree with that. You have to keep it simple. And, part of being a coach is not only getting people strong, it's teaching people the balance between riding their bike, having family time, having fun time. Everyone's got to live. And that enjoyment of working towards getting faster on a bike. So if you could fit all of that in and be focused on the bike, that's where you have success.
I think one of the cool or interesting things about cycling is it's literally a lifetime activity. My dad is going to be 88 in a couple of weeks. He still rides a bike, not competitively, but he enjoys riding a bike. I'm actually trying to convince him to get a fat bike for some gravel roads and things like that. You've mentioned a couple times strength and conditioning, and I know you've got a National Strength and Conditioning Association certification. How do you emphasize that to some of your clients who maybe aren't the elite level, who are saying, Mike, look, tell me what I need to do better, but we know that maybe people who are busy or not as elite, they need to be convinced that, look, not only do you have to ride your bike, but you can benefit with some resistance training, not only for your bike, picking up your kids, doing your yard work, et cetera. How do you explain that to them?
Very simply, it's a core strength, and one simple thing I'll have people do is perform both a plank and boat pose in yoga, and how long can you hold your feet in the air. And some people will report back to me that I can only do that for 10 seconds. Well, then that's why you need to do strength and conditioning, because with a weak core in any sport, you become less coordinated. With a stronger core, you have more endurance overall without even cycling. So those are some of the key aspects. And to be honest, it's hard to get a lot of people to do the strength training because everyone likes to ride their bike, but I preach it to the highest extent.
I know you've mentioned your super high competitive level days are behind you. Aging sucks, as one of my clients once said. He said, that thing about needing more recovery as you get older, it's really true. Mm-hmm. Any bucket list activities or things like, maybe when my son gets a little older or I get a little bit more time, any bucket list cycling activities that still you're kind of saying, I think I want to do that?
I think I want to ride the Colorado Trail. It's 550 miles, and it's intriguing because I just watched the story of a guy that did it and scored record time. But it's just a beautiful trail. I love Colorado. It's one of those things that it's not a competition, although I think they do a competition every year. But it's a casual one. It's free to enter. You show up and you ride. You start in Denver and you end in Durango. So that's my bucket list thing. I think that may happen over the next several years.
People are listening to this, maybe they've just got a bike and enjoyed cycling this summer, and you and I were chatting just before we started recording. This is the second or third really cold day of the year, although it's going to get colder. We both mentioned it takes a while to get used to it. What can they do if they can't get a trainer to keep biking through the winter, so when the spring comes, maybe they're at a higher level and have that enjoyment that they've had this past summer?
Yeah, I've written on this. Stair running is actually very close to cycling. It's maybe one of the closest. But outside of that, hiking is a really good activity through the winter. You can bike outside as long as you dress for it. So if you dress warm, then you get outside after the first 5 or 10 minutes, you're warm inside and you can ride all day. So pick things like rail trails that are flat. If there's a little bit of snow on the ground, those are the safer places to ride. But a combination of staying active, that's the key.
Most of us can go outside and stay reasonably warm, shovel snow, take a little bit of hike. Biking is a little bit different because if you go uphill, you get a little sweat. You go downhill, you cool off. Somebody's listening, Christmas is coming up. Maybe they've got a friend or a family member and they want to buy them a gift. What are the 2 or 3 pieces of cycling equipment for winter that you wish you'd known about when you first started riding?
That's a great question because it's taken 20 years for me to learn how to dress in this climate. Booties over your shoes is the number one thing, or winter boots. Those are both key. I wear booties on 15-degree days and it's comfortable. I wear baggy shorts down past my knees because that blocks the wind, and I put it over some layers underneath. And a bomb-proof jacket that's waterproof and windproof. I have a really good one by a local company, it's bright, it's yellow, and it stops all wind, so it keeps me really warm, with a cap. So those are the 2 things: would be booties, shorts, and a jacket.
And I'd add 2 things from what I've learned after 20 years here, after living in the South. Wool underlayers. I found wool works a lot better than synthetic because when it gets wet, it doesn't get clammy, so you don't get that clammy cool feeling. And it's taken me a number of years to find the right ones, but to keep my hams warm, I'm a huge fan of pogies. I've got pogies for my flat bar bike, and I actually this year went to a gentleman who lives in Calgary, Canada, who builds them or makes them, and got a pair of pogies for my drop bar bike, and I was out this weekend when it was in the low 30s, and I actually had to take my gloves off and have no gloves underneath the pogies.
That's
and
nice.
The fact that my fingers were not freezing after an hour and a half outside was just absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, that's key. I've been down to 15 degrees riding, but usually we drive somewhere, hop out of our car, get riding right away, and we only ride for an hour. So,
Somebody is interested in your top 2 tips or 3 tips for getting into cycling. What do you recommend?
Start wearing a heart rate monitor is one of the basics. It's the cheapest way to get into judging intensity on the bike and learning about heart rates. That would be a big tip. And the other big tip, I think, is finding a way to be consistent at it. That's the number one reason why people don't succeed, is that they may do 4 or 5 days one week, and then 1 day the next 2 weeks, and then 4 or 5 days. That inconsistency is where you lose fitness. So you can find that balance. That's key.
I know for one of my podcasts, I've interviewed a number of times a gentleman named Don Moxley, who's very big in the wearables world and the world of staying active. And his comment is the number one tool anybody who moves on a regular basis should have is a heart rate monitor. And they're as cheap as $40, and probably your iPhone or your Droid phone will pick up on that because many people just don't have an idea.
Yes.
And I think the other comment on that is the consistency, which is why we do movement as a lifestyle. Figuring out whether it's a class that works for you, because I know there are some group cycling classes, some led by cycling coaches, or if there's a day where you're going to ride, I know you're in the North Hills, and if you're driving someplace, if you're just going alone, it's very easy for you to say, yeah, I'm not going to ride today. But if you've got a good friend who's going to ride and you're meeting him there, there's a little bit of peer pressure. Like if Mike doesn't show up, you're going to hear it not only from your friend, but now with social media, he'll probably embarrass you on social media and say, hey, it was only 30 degrees. Where were you, Mike?
I would never do that. But yeah, I agree with that. Having a buddy system is important in exercise. And just getting out there every day, and no matter what, just get on the bike and then see how you feel. Because 5 minutes or 10 minutes later, you may not want to get off the bike.
I know there's a famous, well-known Ironman triathlete, Dave Scott, who coaches now, and I remember reading a quote from him saying, just get out for 20 minutes, even if it's walking, or just spinning the pedals, see how you feel, and if you feel good, keep going. If you don't feel good, stop, but you still got that 20 minutes in.
That's correct.
One final question for you, Mike. I appreciate you taking the time to come on the show. I ask this for everybody that I know who's in a equipment-heavy sport, whether it's snowshoeing, skiing, cycling, kayaking. How many bikes do you have?
I only have 3 bikes because I'm busy and I don't have time to work on bikes. I carry 3 bikes. My road bike, my mountain bike, and I have like a cross bike. I have a lot of spare bikes hanging in my garage ceiling that need to be put together. But I keep it simple. I've always ridden a hardtail mountain bike. I like it very.
We've been talking with Mike Schultz. You can use the Googly Web or check the links that are on the screen. He is the coach and owner of Highland Training and has done a fair amount of writing. If you Google his name, you'll find a fair amount of writing that he's done. Mike, thanks for taking time to come on Movement as a Lifestyle.
You're welcome anytime.